And welcome once again to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. We're glad you decided to join us today. We've been doing a series of shows on candidates for this November's races, and today we got a couple of heavyweights.
Yes, we do indeed. The two candidates, both Democrat and Republican nominees for the office of State Attorney General. Scott Pruitt and Jim Priest will be back with us. They've both been on with us separately, but they'll be on together talking about the issues, and we think you'll find this interesting.
Republican Scott Pruitt, Democrat Jim Priest, today's guests on The Verdict. We'll be right back.
We didn't just wake up with this problem. Barrel by barrel, dollar by dollar, we've been exchanging American security for foreign oil. Enough. We're home to a 100-year supply of natural gas, and now we know its potential. Fuel, power, cleaner air. See how natural gas is making a difference at chk.com. Chesapeake, America's champion of natural gas.
Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma, working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate in Oklahoma City and Tulsa.
There's no waiting at the St. Anthony ER.
No waiting.
Announcing the end of ER waiting at St. Anthony Hospital. Go to saintsok.com and reserve your time online.
Why didn't we think of that?
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
We are very pleased today to welcome back two friends of ours who've both been on the show before, but not together, and that's why we wanted to schedule them again for you to see. On my right is Scott Pruitt, the Republican nominee for Attorney General. Scott did his undergraduate work at Georgetown College, his law work at the University of Tulsa. He was in private practice for a number of years, specializing in constitutional law. In 1998, he was elected to the Oklahoma State Senate and served there with distinction. He now is the co-owner and managing general partner of the Oklahoma City Redhawks. He has a wife and two children joining him in this campaign. On my left is Jim Priest, the Democratic nominee for Attorney General. Did his undergraduate work at Houghton College, did his law work at Syracuse University, where he graduated magna cum laude. He has been in private practice for over 30 years. He's very active in his church, and he is married and has 3 children. Welcome to both you guys.
Thanks,
Welcome
Ken.
back.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we'll start with the typical question, and that is, why did you run? And Jim, you're up first.
Yeah. Well, that's probably the most frequently asked question. I'm sure Scott's gotten this too. It really is something that arose out of my dad saying to me years ago. If you want to be fulfilled in life and have a purpose, find a way to serve people. And so I've tried to do that through my whole life, through scouting as a young boy, and then through the ministry and through my law practice for 30 years. And this is an opportunity to serve the people in an area where they need a strong advocate protecting them, because that's the job of the Attorney General. So I'm hoping this is an opportunity for me to use my 30 years of law practice to serve the people.
Scott?
Well, fundamentally for me, it's about freedom. I've been out of politics for the last several years. As I've been watching the encroachment of Washington in key areas, healthcare obviously is an example that people know a lot about. I believe our liberties and our freedoms are at stake. I believe people realize that, and they realize the Attorney General can do something about it. And I've got a track record as a legislator, as a leader overall, to responding to those kinds of issues, and I will as Attorney General, because I believe people want an advocate. They want a fighter fighting back against Washington, D.C. to protect their interests at this time.
Scott, let me direct this to you, and then I'll direct the same question to Jim. How does your background and experience qualify you to serve as Attorney General?
I think my background is very diverse, and when you have the legal background for 17 years, plus, as you indicated, Kent, in the opening comments, the business background in addition to the legislative leadership, those three things, I think, equip me to be an effective advocate on behalf of the people of Oklahoma right now. Who better to enforce and execute the laws as Attorney General than someone that's actually drafted those laws as a legislator? Who better to execute and enforce the laws in the state of Oklahoma than a business owner who's lived under those laws, understands how regulation and laws affect how you conduct your business, and as an attorney in the courtroom, transactional work, a diverse practice focused on constitutional issues historically that I think equip me effectively to represent those interests against Washington today.
Jim, the same question.
Right. Well, I think the most important job of the Attorney General is to be an attorney. And so 30 years of practice representing a broad variety of clients equips me to do that. I've been in the courtroom and tried nearly 100 lawsuits. I'm not sure if Scott's tried any lawsuits, but I think it's important for the Attorney General to know how to keep your client out of court. That's the best advice I always give my clients. Find a way to stay out of court. And if you can't, if you have to go to court, somebody who's been in the courtroom trying cases. I've argued appellate decisions and cases in front of the 10th Circuit, in front of our state Supreme Court, and I think we ought to have an Attorney General who's actually been in the appellate courtroom arguing cases like I have. And I've managed a large law firm. I was part of a large law firm for a number of years. That's what the Attorney General's office is a large law firm. And so I, of course, bring a broad variety of experience as well, not just as a lawyer. I've been involved in the charitable community, been a minister in my church working with marriages and families. I wrote a newspaper column for a number of years called Family Talk, and wrote another one in the Business Journal Record business newspaper called On Ethics. And I've taught and spoken to groups all across the state about the importance of ethics. Rooting out political corruption is an important part of the Attorney General as well. So to protect the people, I think I've done that for 30 years. I've done it for all kinds of clients and worked with all kinds of state agencies. I think that equips me best to be the Attorney General.
Jim, as you campaign around the state, you're meeting lots of potential voters. What are they telling you are the issues, and how do you respond?
All right. Well, I start many of my talks by saying, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, because I've said that, like I said, nearly 100 times in courtrooms across the state. And on November 2nd, they will be jurors. They will vote on the evidence. And so they tell me they're witnesses now to what's going on, and they'll be jurors later on. What I'm hearing most often from people, number one, of course, is concern about the economy. What's going to happen in the state and in the country, and are jobs safe, and that sort of thing. Close behind that are the things that impact the economy, like methamphetamine addiction and prescription drug abuse. And I've been talking about that throughout. We have a law enforcement advisory panel that I've asked to come together, chaired by Pat Ryan, former U.S. attorney who prosecuted Timothy McVeigh, to tell me what's going on in the field. And the number one problem that I hear from both citizens and law enforcement is methamphetamine. It drives about 80% of our crime. And then close behind that is the water issue. Water's the new oil for Oklahoma. And we've got to make sure that our water is both clean and that it's not sold prematurely before we know what our own needs are and to the wrong people. So those are I'd say the main things that I'm hearing from folks.
Scott, you've traveled in the state and campaigning too. What are you hearing?
For quite some time, and I'm hearing consistently that people are concerned with respect to the methamphetamine issue as an example, the impact of immigration or lack thereof as far as the federal government coming in and enforcing and securing the border. The drug cartels, the drug trafficking that we see coming north of the border in Oklahoma, the Fed's irresponsibility is affecting that and actually contributing to that. You talk to law enforcement in southeast Oklahoma, they will tell you that the meth problem, because we're not enforcing our border, we're also seeing an increase in meth and meth trafficking. But beyond that, I think people's freedoms, I think people's liberties, this health care legislation that passed earlier this year, for the first time, I think people are awakened to the fact that the federal government's on the march, that they're trying to restate the balance between the federal and state government. They believe their freedoms from a business perspective and an individual perspective are at risk. They know that the Attorney General can do something about it, and they know that I will. And so the issues that they see from a constitutional perspective, in addition to these issues of criminal justice on meth, I think are the issues that I see consistently.
Scott, let me stay with you and ask you the question. I'll then ask the same question to Jim. How can the Attorney General in that official position combat crime in Oklahoma? And if he or she can, in this case a he, what would you do?
I mean, I think it's a priority. When you look at, the AG is not a super DA. I think, number one, the AG needs to coordinate and cooperate with local DAs, listen to them on how better we can do the job effectively as a team and as a focus of the office. I think the other issue, Kent, is personnel and priority. On the death penalty as an example, the AG last week sought a lifting of the stay. In this case recently, the Smart case, trying to say, let's push this along because justice delayed is justice denied. And so I think the Attorney General can focus on the priorities of the office, both in the death penalty cases, working with DAs locally, and then using the multi-county grand jury in an effective way, perhaps with meth, to say, you know, we see some trafficking from county to county. Let's use that to effectively combat the meth trafficking with the multi-county grand jury. So I think it's a matter of priority and focus, and then coordination with the local DAs.
Jim?
Well, I'd agree with at least part of what Scott's talking about. I think it is prioritization. When we've got a slim state budget right now, we've got to make sure we're doing the most important things first. Scott talks about creating an office of federalism to fight the federal government. I want to create a cybercrime unit to fight cybercrime, to make sure that we don't have victims of scams on the internet, sexual predators on the internet. And so we've got to prioritize what fights do we want to fight. And I think the most dangerous situation facing us comes from the criminal element, the drug cartels. The Attorney General is the point person. He is on the Oklahoma District Attorney Advisory Council. He works very closely with the DAs, and I've talked with lots and lots of DAs across the state, as well as law enforcement officials, about what can we do. And one of the things that they tell me is, we want you to speak up more about these issues, about the crime issues, and make sure that you're using the bully pulpit, be the spokesperson for law enforcement. And one of the other things I've talked to them about is trying to help them with grants, to help grant writing through the Attorney General's office for local law enforcement, because we've got law enforcement agencies that don't have a car, that don't have sufficient flashlights, and we can't expect people to fight crime if we don't equip them well.
Jim Priest and Scott Pruitt are running for the state Attorney General. Kent and I will be back with them right after this.
Most of the artwork that I produce is with colored pencil and watercolor. The subject matter that I use is, of course, Chickasaw. Most of my themes revolve around family and really that foundation that has been a part of Chickasaw life since ancient times. The Chickasaw Nation is a matriarchal society. You've got one lady, she's probably the oldest member of the family, that everybody goes to and that everybody reveres. That is something that every woman can look forward to in the Chickasaw Nation, because they are extremely important in the family. Maybe one day I will be a matriarch. I think this is probably the secret to the success of our government, is that we still have maintained that idea that family is the most important thing, and that we must minister to the family first, and then all other things will fall into place.
The oil and natural gas industry help provide a revenue that feeds our schools, providing a better education for not only my kids, but for children all over the state.
It will allow the schools to buy better equipment. We'll be able to hire qualified teachers, and all around to have a better educational experience.
The future has never been brighter for our students here.
We should be very proud of the oil and gas industry in Oklahoma.
You're watching The Verdict. Scott Pruitt and Jim Priest are our guests. They're running for the state Attorney General's office. Jim, from time to time, the Attorney General's office typically finds it a responsible step to hire an outside attorney to represent the state. How would you handle those types of decisions?
Yeah. The work that is needed to be done can't be done solely by state attorneys. There has to be outside counsel hired, and I know lots of folks get frustrated with that and they think we ought to conserve our money, but there's simply too much to be done. And they kind of fall into two major categories. There's lawyers that are hired by state and state agencies on an hourly rate basis, and then those hired on a contingent fee basis. Now, the hourly rate basis lawyers, everything's pretty known about them. They agree in writing what their hourly rate's going to be. They usually have a cap on how much they're going to do. And the Attorney General has a role in approving that, making sure that the fees aren't too high, that it's an appropriate use of outside counsel, and if it's something that the Attorney General's office can handle and has the expertise to handle, then it should. The contingent fee contracts are a little different, and I think those, there's been some criticism of the current Attorney General about how those have been handled. I think an easy way to eliminate criticism is by having a competitive bidding process and making sure that it's transparent, making sure that people know ahead of time, here's what the terms of engagement are. And you don't want to hire the lawyer who's the cheapest any more than you want to write in an elevator that was built by the cheapest bidder. You want something that's done by a competent person at a good price. And that's what you want in lawyers. On the contingency fee, I would have a bidding process. I'd have an independent kind of judicial nominating committee system where people would make a recommendation from qualified candidates for the case, the contingency fee case, and we check their competency and their rate to make sure that it's competitive.
Scott?
Well, Mayor, I think that, one, it should be rare. I think that when you have an agency, an office of 150 or so employees, 60 or so, now this is being, because of budgetary issues has changed, but that's something that we ought to do all we can to keep the work of the office internal to the AG's office, because the people have put that leader in place and that office in place to affect the Oklahomans' interest. But when we do have to retain outside counsel, in every instance, in my estimation, it ought to be open and transparent and competitively bid. I actually introduced legislation when I was in the Senate. It was the Sunshine Law that actually required that process, open and competitiveness, transparency, would be in place when we hired outside counsel. And that's important because the taxpayers need to know, who are we hiring, why are we hiring them, how are they being paid, and what is their role on behalf of the state? Because you're empowering them on behalf of Oklahoma taxpayers. So it's important, I think, the process is open and competitive.
Scott, let me ask you, how can the Attorney General protect the consumers of Oklahoma?
Well, when you look at the role of the AG on consumer protection, it's a hugely important role. I mean, many years ago with the tornadoes that occurred in '99 and thereafter, we introduced legislation in Oklahoma dealing with price gouging for storm shelters. So the AG must actively and aggressively protect consumers' interest with respect to price gouging, with respect to consumer fraud. Just in Tulsa this past week, we had many instances where banks and those elderly and the most vulnerable were having their bank accounts electronically compromised and funds were being diverted. We need an AG that's aggressively going to pursue that, prosecute that vigorously, make that an important part of the office on a go-forward basis.
Jim, same question.
One thing to remember, I think, we tend to have this notion that consumers are only those who are taken advantage of by a roofing contractor. It's much broader than that. The consumers in Oklahoma are both businesses and people. And the Attorney General's office has a wide array of responsibilities and tools to combat that. So you've got the Consumer Fraud Unit that's already in place that does a good job of dealing with things like roofing contractors, the Do Not Call registry, making sure that individual consumers have an avenue of complaint and can get directed to people that can help them. There's also the Workers' Comp Fraud Unit, which I think is a way of protecting consumers. You're protecting businesses and you're protecting taxpayers to make sure the workers' comp fraud doesn't take over the system. And you've got the Medicare Fraud Unit, and they make sure that people are taken care of, our seniors who are among our most vulnerable citizens. Our seniors are taken care of, they're not scammed. I was surprised to learn that 16% of senior abuse, both financial and physical abuse, is reported. So the vast majority of senior abuse is not reported. So we've got to make sure that people know how to report consumer fraud or patient abuse, and the Attorney General's office has both an educational and a prosecution responsibility on that.
Let's have about a 30-second answer from each of you on the health care legislation that Congress passed and what you feel about it.
Yeah. Washington does a lot of things that we don't like, but we can't react out of frustration and anger at things that they don't like. We have to have a cooperative constitutional relationship. And I tell my clients all the time, Don't go to court unless it's a last resort. Now, I would not have sued in federal court in Florida, and I won't if I'm elected. But there is a way to go directly to the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm admitted to the U.S. Supreme Court, so I know about this, to file a petition and ask the U.S. Supreme Court to decide thumbs up or thumbs down on the constitutionality. And if I were going to do anything, that's what I would do, and spend my time fighting crime.
Scott?
I think we need to engage on the health care legislation, challenging the constitutionality of it. Either joining the other 20 states or filing an independent action, I think, is a strategic decision that should be made at the time the next Attorney General takes office. To me, it's bigger than health care. It's about power and authority. It's about the role of the federal government and what reach they have over our lives, both business and individual. It extends into other areas like the EPA. EPA has indicated they're going to regulate CO2 without cap and trade being passed. Texas has already responded aggressively to that. We as a state have to protect our interest. The consumer, the banking bill that was just passed, the financial reform package. Again, areas that traditionally have been left to the states, the feds are moving aggressively in those areas. It's about power and authority, and we've got to respond to it.
We try to wrap up these shows with two candidates, with giving each of them an opportunity to give a kind of a closing statement to the camera. We flipped a coin before the show starts. The result of that coin flip was that Scott would go first. Scott, your candidacy.
Fundamentally, I think that any candidate running for office, the most important question that they need to answer is, what's your motive? Because, you know, issues change. We can't predict 2 or 3 years from now what the issues the next Attorney General is going to be dealing with. 2 years ago, if we'd have said the federal government would have passed a health care legislation coercing everyone in America to buy health care, we'd have said, no, that's not going to happen. It did. So when someone seeks an office for a position or a title, when they get it, they do everything they can to keep it. And they don't risk and they don't lead. That's not my motive. My motive is to advance Oklahomans' freedom, the state's interest, against the Washington, D.C. mentality that they know best. And myself as the Attorney General, and we as a state must respond to that in a meaningful fashion, while at the same time maintaining a commitment to those traditional roles of the office of fighting crime, handling the death penalty cases efficiently, and also making sure that we tackle and fight corruption in the state of Oklahoma.
Okay. Jim?
Well, one of the things that I want to tell our viewers is that you're making a hiring decision. I started out the program earlier saying, gentlemen and ladies of the jury, you'll vote on November the 2nd. And you are informed jurors. You'll look at the evidence, and I think there's a clear choice in the role of Attorney General and how Scott views the role and how I view the role. I think the most important job of the Attorney General is to protect the people through prevention and through prosecution. And I think we at the Attorney General's office ought to be engaged in protecting our most vulnerable citizens, making sure that our children are protected, our seniors are protected, domestic violence victims are protected. We've got to deal with the methamphetamine problem and the prescription drug problem, and the Attorney General can have a significant role in that. That's why I created the Law Enforcement Advisory Panel, to make sure that I'm listening to law enforcement people in the field. Water is a huge issue, and both the pollution and the sale of water is going to loom large on the agenda of the next Attorney General. So when you get in the voting booth, I encourage people to look at this as a hiring decision. You're hiring who you want to be the people's lawyer over the course of the next 4 years. Look at the qualifications, look at the background, get recommendations from people just as you would if you were hiring a lawyer to represent you in a car accident or in a will. The family lawyer is important to you as individuals. The Attorney General is important to you as people in the state of Oklahoma. And if you'll make that hiring decision, the most qualified candidate, I'm confident you'll vote for me, and I appreciate and be grateful for your vote.
Jim Priest and Scott Pruitt are running for Attorney General. Thank you both for coming on The Verdict. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you all for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And Kent and I'll have a final word when we return right here on The Verdict.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. a place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information. And for almost 30 years, Oklahoma political, government, and business leaders have turned to the McCarville Report for accurate, reliable, inside information. Visit the McCarville Report online.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. This has been a show about the Attorney General's race. Scott Pruitt and Jim Priest have been our guests.
Well, they're both fine candidates. The voters have a really good choice to make. It'll be interesting to see what the voters' verdict is. But two great candidates for Attorney General.
And we have website information, how you can go and get more information on the two candidates. First, Scott Pruitt's website is scottpruitt.com. That's SCOTTPRUITT.com. And Jim Priest's candidacy has information about his nomination and his candidacy, and it's jimpriest.com, JIMPRIEST.com. And we have information about our show, theverdict.tv. We encourage you to go to the website and check it out and tell us about a guest or a show topic that you'd like to see discussed right here on The Verdict. That web address is theverdict.tv. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next time right here on The Verdict.
The preceding program was produced exclusively for the Cox Channel.